Good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to all of you. I'm Sadiksha Panta, the moderator of this session on behalf of Ednep Abhiyan, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's online panel discussion titled Building an Academic Career in Economics. Ednep Abhiyan is a student-led initiative that provides academic resources, mentorship, and a strong learning community for economics and business students globally. Through sessions like this, we aim to create meaningful conversations around research, higher studies, and academic careers. Before we begin, I would like to briefly go over a few housekeeping guidelines to ensure a smooth and productive session. I kindly request everyone to keep your microphones muted throughout the discussion. If you have any questions or clarifications, please hold them until the end. We will have a dedicated Q&A session. If you face any technical issues or need to speak during the session, please raise your hand before unmuting. Thank you for your cooperation. It is my pleasure to introduce today's panelist, Dr. Niraj Khatiwada. Dr. Khatiwada is currently a visiting assistant professor of economics at Texas A&M University, USA. He holds a PhD in economics from the University of New Mexico with research interests in environmental economics, development economics, and applied microeconomics. He brings extensive experience in academic research, teaching, and policy-oriented work, including research engagement in Nepal. His academic journey offers valuable insights for students aspiring to pursue higher studies and research careers in economics. Welcome, Niraj sir, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sadiksha, and thank you, Ednep Abhiyan, for organizing this event. And I'm happy that so many of you joined. So welcome all.
So let's begin our discussion. I would like to ask about your academic journey. You studied at an interdisciplinary program combining mathematics and business management, and later moved into economics for your master's and PhD. What motivated this shift, and how did it shape your thinking as an economist?
So I came to United States in 2012. Initially, I was really interested in mathematics and physics. So I really liked mathematics. I really wanted to go into mathematics. I've always liked thinking about numbers, identifying patterns in numbers, right? So that was my initial start, and then I was really looking to study mathematics at a college or university in the United States. So I came to United States in 2012, and again I was very young when I came. I was just 20 years old at the time, and so while you're in the US, while you're doing a degree, it's also expected of you to take classes other than your field of study. So as I was a mathematics student, I also had to take classes in philosophy and psychology, religion, and things like that. So as part of my graduation requirement, I had to take two classes in economics, which was introduction to micro and macroeconomics. So I went to one of these microeconomics class, and from the very first day, I was very hooked, because here is a subject that is explaining things, what I do in my daily life, right? So there's a social element to it, and it's also rigorous. It's also using mathematics, statistics, and it's also like understanding what I do personally at my daily life, right? So I still remember that lecture, and then it was talking about how when you're eating a pizza, for example, and they eat slices, right? So when you eat the first pizza, and then you derive some satisfaction, some utility, and then you go to your next pizza, the satisfaction is still there, but then it's like diminishes. So I was really fascinated by the whole discussion, and I took that course. I really enjoyed that, and then next I took macroeconomics, and then I took development economics, right? So as I took more courses, I got really excited, about economics. So then I started to prepare myself to study economics at the graduate school. However, the problem is that the college that I went to in the United States, this was Bryan College in Pennsylvania. It was a very small college, and it didn't have an econ department that offered a standalone econ major. So therefore, I decided to start preparing for my graduate school economics. But I realized that to prepare well, you need to have good understanding of mathematics. So I kept with my mathematics degree, but I also added business management, and I also did a minor in philosophy. Right. So the whole purpose of undergrad was to prepare myself for a graduate degree in economics.
Okay, so moving forward, during your graduate years at the University of New Mexico, was there a specific moment when you realized you wanted to commit to research and academia as a long-term path?
I entered the University of New Mexico in 2016. So the good thing about US is I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but you can directly go to PhD from your undergrad. So you don't you can skip. I mean, the PhD program is a combination of so it's a master's and PhD program combined. It's a 5 to 6 year program, so you can directly go from your bachelor's to PhD. Okay, so skipping the masters. So I was one of those people who went straight from my bachelor's to PhD, and then the first 2 years are basically you're taking PhD level classes, but those also fulfill your master's requirements. So you get masters along your PhD, but then the end goal is PhD. So I entered New Mexico University of New Mexico, and I was taking all the classes. Starting to do my research, and my initial plan was to go into a research organization. So places like the United Nations or the World Bank or Asian Development Bank, EC mode. So that was my initial, my target to go into this. And I actually had the opportunity to work at EC mode. So while I was doing my PhD, the last 2 years of my PhD, I actually had a chance to work as a research fellow in EC mode in Nepal. So there, I had like a first hand, I had a chance to have a first hand experience on doing research in Nepal. So that was there. So again, my whole idea was to have a career in research experience. But what happened was when I was about to graduate, I graduated at a very wrong time. So there was a COVID period, and I was well settled in EC mode, and I was hoping to continue my work at EC mode and hopefully join other bigger organization at some point in my life. But there was the COVID happened, and when I was about to graduate, the COVID was still on, and then the job market was really down. So at EC mode, and EC mode also lost a lot of its funding, so they were not able to retain a lot of its staff. So I came back to the United States, and since the research, the job market or the labor market, the job market was so down that I, ended up, applying for academic positions while also applying for research positions in research organization. So my initial plan was not to go into academia. So it happened. But once I got into academia, once I started as a assistant professor, I really loved it. I really loved teaching in class. I really loved interacting with students, and I've been doing it full time for the last 4 years.
Okay, so how did you choose your PhD research direction and what role did mentors or advisors play?
So mentors play this wonderful role during a PhD program, because like I said, I went to PhD direct from my undergrad, so there was a lot of things I wasn't aware of. There was a lot of like this learning for me to do in a very short time. So I started working as a TA for one of the professors, Dr. Alok Bohra. So he was also this Nepali economist who was a professor, full-time professor at University of New Mexico, and I became a TA under him for a semester. So while I was working as a TA for him, and then he actually introduced me to a lot of topics, and then slowly we started working together. He would give me all the research ideas, and then he would ask me to, let's say one day he'd ask me to read a paper on this topic, and then we'll get together and then have a meeting and then discuss about the paper, the finding, all the statistical method. So I got lucky because right at the start of my PhD program, I got introduced to him, and then I became his TA, and then he started teaching all these amazing things to me. So within the first 1 or 2 years of PhD, I was able to make up for all the all the shortcomings that I had in my CV. So from going from undergrad to PhD, and then in my undergrad I didn't have a like an undergrad degree in economics. So that is this huge gap to fill within a very short time. But then luckily for me, my PhD advisor played that role where he was able to guide me in this very short time. So within 1 year, 2 year PhD, I was able to do a lot. So I was able to learn a lot. So and then. The other thing about graduate program is that so when you go from undergrad to your master's program or a PhD program, so from early on, we've been trained how to go to classes, take exams, right? So those things that we start doing that from very early on. But when you go to grad school, right, and then do a master's or a PhD, right? So the big expectation is that you do a research, and then our training in research is not rigorous until you actually go to the graduate studies, right? So for taking exams we have been trained for a very long time, but when you actually go to masters of the PhD program, and then you have to do your research, and then our training research if typically they're not very strong. So you need to figure out how do I conduct research, and the conduct research is a big challenge, because when you go to PhD, right, you in your thesis you are trying to come up with a research question that no one has answered before, right? The first challenge is how do you come up with that research question? Then what kind of data you need? What kind of methodology? So, and then we've not been trained to do that, since our early childhood. So that is something that you learn very later on, and then so figuring that out was a big challenge in grad school.
So it seems like it was a very meaningful journey studying abroad. Apart from that challenges, what were the biggest challenges you faced while moving from Nepal to graduate study abroad, and how did you handle them?
So I'll talk about my experience going from Nepal to my undergrad. So because I first went to undergrad, so moving from undergrad to graduate studies was, I'd say, like an easier transition that than going from Nepal to my undergrad. So when I first came to United States, I wasn't a very confident person, and then I was in classes where we would have so many people from so many different countries, and then again in Nepal we don't have a habit of speaking in class, but then in the United States the classes are very discussion based. Everyone is contributing, everyone is participating. So in my classes, right, since I didn't have the habit of speaking in class and everyone else is participating, right, so I used to be very scared early on. And then since there's so many people from so many other countries, and then all of those people are amazing, and then there's some wonderful, so like things to share in class. So I was initially, I didn't have much confidence in myself. Okay, I was self-aware. I was worried about whether my if I speak in class, if because of my accent people will be able to understand me or not, or if I'm thinking anything correctly, if I'll share something stupid in class. So I'd be very self-conscious, and then I'd be something that would really bug me for a very long time. But slowly, once the classes started having the exams and then assignments, and I realized that I'm actually doing quite well in the class, right? So I remember in one of the classes, I actually ended up getting the highest score in the class. And there slowly, there's a realization that well, I belong here, right? So, well, I may not be able, I may not be speaking in class. I may not have the confidence to speak in class, right? I may be self-aware about a lot of things, but but since I'm doing well in the class, right? I'm getting A's in all my assignments. I'm doing well in the class. The teachers are happy with me, right? So that's gave me a kind of self-confidence, and I slowly started building on that. And then by the time I ended my undergraduate program, I was actually very confident about myself. Okay, so and then after that I moved to graduate school, and all those qualms, they started going down. But initially, moving from Nepal to undergrad was this big hurdle for me. And on top of that, you're also in a new country, and then you're really young, and you're also dealing with your the social shock and cultural shock. And typically for a lot of Nepali students, when you start your program in August, so if the program starts in August typically, so the undergraduate program, the graduate program, so they either start in the US, they either start in January, or in August. So August is the time when most students come. So you come to the US in August, and then in October, Dasai happens. Dasai Tihar happens, the major festivals in Nepal. So within the first 1 or 2 months of coming to USA, you're already very homesick. You already face a big culture shock, and on top of that, you may lack confidence about yourself. So all those things are there for you to overcome.
Thank you for sharing your journey with us. It has truly been an insightful learning experience to understand how your academic interests evolved over time. Now, building on that, let's move towards your research interest and specialization. Your primary focus is environmental and natural resource economics with strong links to development and sustainability. How did this interest evolve over time?
Okay, so again, I started my PhD, and then I got introduced to my professor, Dr. Alok Bohra, and he was doing, this amazing research in Nepal. He was primarily a macroeconomist, and he had done a lot of work in macroeconomics. But later, the second half of his academic journey, since he's from Nepal, he's also started thinking about issues in Nepal. So he was doing, all these amazing surveys in Nepal, collecting data from Nepal on environmental issues. So he was doing work in Kathmandu already, or in Sindhupalchok, or the Lumbini area. So he asked me whether I'd be interested in doing something similar, and then he gave me some time to think about it. And so I started my PhD in 2016, and then every summer, so in the United States, we study we have the 2 semesters. So each semesters are like 4 months long, and then there's this winter break of 1 month during Christmas time, and then during summertime we have this 3 month off. So every year during summer, I used to come to Nepal. So I came to Nepal in 2017 summer, 18 summer, and so on. So every time I'd come to Nepal, the air pollution so I could visibly see the air pollution in Kathmandu, and there are also reports coming out from World Bank and other places saying that the air quality in Kathmandu or just the South Asian region is massive. There's a big problem. There's a lot of the health impact. There's a lot of economic cost involved. So I was always curious about the air pollution problem, and I started doing some my initial research on and whether there've been economic studies published on this. So what I found was that there have been scientific studies conducted in Nepal, looking at what is the level of air pollution, when is the air pollution level very high, summer versus winter, whether there's fluctuation during daytime. So all the scientific studies, and then I had a chance to again work at ICIMOR, and ICIMOR was doing an amazing job looking at all these things scientifically. For the From the social side, I saw there was this big gap in the literature. So, there were some studies, but then those studies are mostly looking at what is the impact of indoor air pollution, whether you're using open stoves in your house or not, whether you're doing cleaner stoves, and what is the impact of using cleaner stoves versus traditional stoves, the smoke, how does the impact on health. So there were some studies looking at the effect of indoor air pollution and also the impact of whether switching to cleaner fuels at the household level, whether that was making an impact. So there was a couple of studies, but I just found this really big gap in the literature which was trying to understand what is the impact on health. Right, and then also not just the health, but who are more impacted. What are some mechanisms that gives to these differences in the health impacts, or how much value people value clean air. Okay, so whether people see air pollution as a big problem, whether or how much they value clean air. What is the so what is so understanding things from a social point of view. So there was this big gap in the literature. So I came back after one summer, and then I pitched this idea to my advisor, saying that I see there's this big gap here, and I think there's this avenue for us to contribute. And then, so we got into this project, and then again we realized, okay, what kind of data is needed, and then so we saw that okay, because since we didn't see data that would help answer our research question. So we decided to do our own survey to collect data from the field, and then we we first applied for a grant, and then the grant was $7,000. So we got the grant, and then we got another two or three thousand from dollars from other places. So with that $10,000 budget, I came to Kathmandu in summer of 2019, and then we went to Bhairava, and then where we collected our data. And then we linked that data to air pollution information, and then we were able to analyze all these issues.
That gives us a strong understanding of your research focus. Now we will like to explore the practical side of research. When starting a new project, how do you translate a real world problem like air quality or river restoration into a clean research question and an empirical strategy?
Okay, so firstly, the main thing is coming up with a research question. But then coming up with a research question could be challenging because, like I said, we've not been trained to do research, for a very long time, and then, coming up with research question, this methodology, could, it's a hard work, and then we've not been trained, well enough to do that. So. We need to start with the research question, but then the research question is really based on understanding what's the gap in the literature. So for that, we need to study extensively, the published research. So in my case, during my PhD, I think I read around 300 to 400 papers. So first is reading all those papers, understanding what evidence we already have, in what context, what evidence do we still need, what are the gaps in the literature. So first is identifying that. So once you identify those gaps, then you're able to come up with research questions. So in my case, for example, my PhD research, I wanted to see whether air pollution has an impact on people or not. But then the follow-up question is, what kind of people? Do we see differences in exposure level, and do we see differences in health outcomes? Okay, even within the small city of Bhairava, does air pollution impact equally, or is there a certain group of people who are more impacted, and what are the underlying mechanism, what are the underlying channels because of which they receive higher exposure and impact? And then lastly, how much, okay, what are the economic costs then? Once the health impact is there, what are the other social economic costs that people suffer from exposure? And lastly, how much people value clean air? So those are my research questions, but this is again based on extensive research, understanding, okay, what are the gaps in the literature, okay, whether there are already studies published on this, what are some ways in which I can extend that research. So all those are there. So once I have those research questions, then I start on thinking about, okay, what kind of data would help me answer those questions. So in my case, I understood that I need to collect those data myself. So the data are not ready available, and that's typically what happens in Nepal and the South Asian context, is that um, there are data available for some things, and then there are data not available for a lot of our research to answer our research questions. So in my case, I didn't see any data that would help us help answer my research question. So I again applied for the grant. I made the questionnaire myself, and then I went to Nepal and then did the survey of 610 households. So that was the approach that I took to in my research. So the other thing. So once the data collection happened, so once I have the data, the next is okay, how to analyze this data? What is the econometric technique that I use to estimate my data? So your economic technique is really based on your data. So data could come in different forms. Your data could be a continuous variable, it could be a binary variable, there could be some endogenous issue, there could be some other issues that you need to think about. So your empirical framework, so don't start a research by saying that I am going to use this empirical framework. So your empirical framework is really guided by your data, right? So again, the steps of research is that you do good literature review, understand where the research gaps are, then formulate research questions like where you can contribute, where you can publish paper, where you can contribute, and then next find data to answer your question. And once you have your data, then look for the empirical strategy that would be applicable to your data.
Okay, so as you mentioned, you worked with household surveys and public preference estimation. What are the biggest practical challenges in the field data collection and ensuring data quality in Nepal?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So Like I said, data often in Nepal and in the South Asian region, we don't have data, especially micro level data to answer a lot of this question. So you need to come up, one way to tackle that is that you come up with your own survey and then you generate your own data, and this is what I did. But then collecting data is difficult, right? And one is that so data collection can be very costly. So in my case, it took us the overall cost was $10,000, which is roughly 14 lakhs in Nepali rupees right now. So we collected a household survey of 610 households. So that took us 14 lakhs because you need to you need money, for example, to go to travel to all these places. And since I was collecting data of 610 households, I also had to, so hire a team, right? So make a team. So I hired 8 numerators, so who would go to field and then, and do all the questionnaires. I also had two people who were analyzing the data, entering the data. So not analyzing the data, but entering the data. And then I also had a supervisor who would supervise everything. And then but then before doing the survey, I had to do a focus group discussion, inviting all the local stakeholders. So while you're doing these sessions, you also need to buy them food, right? And also while you're conducting survey, you need to give incentives to households, right? So in our case, we give like small incentives like soaps or washing powder or toothpaste, something like that, right? So that gives incentive to households who are taking part in the survey. So there are costs involved, right? So first is that finding that grant to help conduct the research, and the next part is then developing the questionnaire, right? So questionnaire, and also you need to make questionnaire appropriate to those regions. So in my case, for example, I was conducting my survey in Bhairava, and then in Bhairava there's this big Muslim population, right? So questions like, do you drink? Okay, so those questions, the households react very strongly. Okay, so you need to go to field, understand, your survey respondents. Okay, whether they'd be triggered by certain questions like, do you drink or not, or do you smoke or not, do you consume tobacco or not. So those kind of questions may trigger them. So you need to be very sensitive about those issues. And then also, so while you're connecting this the field survey, you need to ensure that there's a random sampling involved, right? So your research question and then analysis as good as your data. So you need to ensure that there's a random sampling, right? So you're sampling your respondents randomly, and ensuring randomness is difficult, right? So we followed the World Bank guidelines on how to ensure that there's randomness while collecting data. But again, this could be tricky, right? For example, the World Bank suggests that you sample a household, and then sample, so like take every fifth household to your right. But then in the case of Nepal, right, so we have this hilly landscape. So your fifth household could be like behind the hill, so you need to travel, you walk for 2 hours to reach to that households. So those could be some challenging. Also, the other challenge could be that so I was conducting my survey during this really peak heat time in Bhairava. So in Pairaba, during summertime, it easily reaches 40, 45 degrees Celsius, and all the enumerators are going to field in this really extremely heat. So I always fear that the enumerators might just fill out the survey themselves rather than actually asking the household. So I had to cross check. I had to randomly go to field and then cross check whether they're actually conducting those and they're actually sort of filling out those questionnaire asking households. So I had to ensure that. So and then once you collect those data, then entering the data, you encounter all kinds of questions. A lot of the questions the households don't answer, right? So we have to keep reminding the enumerators that the house, please ask households to provide some response. So we don't want any blank responses. Okay, so all this is a very challenging, it's a very long process. I would say that I almost spent 10 months of my PhD just writing grants, developing questionnaire, going to the field, collecting data, and entering the data. So that the entire 10 months was spent just doing that. And then after that, once I get the data, now I can sit down and start analyzing them to start writing a paper.
Okay, so how do you balance methodological rigor with policy relevance when working on environmental and developmental issues?
So yeah, so all the research that we do, has some policy implication, right? So we are doing our research not for the sake of it, but we do want to inform policies, right? In the case of Nepal, right, in my case, for example, we see that there's an impact of air pollution, or there's the impact of dirty, rivers. The people are impacted, people who are directly using river water, for example, or people who are directly sort of like inhaling air. So those are impacted, right? So our purpose is always, how do I conduct research so that we inform policies? How do we help policymakers? So once we sort of like analyze our data, we have our results and our findings, and based on our findings we are able to make recommendations. And in my case, like I was very I was very happy when one of the so there was a lawsuit filed in Supreme Court of Nepal. So they were trying to. So the Lumbini zone, right, was already protected, but then for a really long time, local industries started cropping up near the Lumbini region. So this one group wanted to advocate against those because Lumbini, this there's this big cultural site in Nepal. A lot of tourists come to see Lumbini, so it's the UN protected area. So this group wanted the government wanted to draw government attention towards all this this local industry that is polluting and then impacting the Lumbini region. So since and my research was very close to Lumbini, we were approached to write a statement, saying that, well, my research found that if you live near local industries, then your health is impacted, right? So there's an economic cost involved. So there was finding from one of my papers in my dissertation. So based on that research, based on that finding, we were able to write a supporting statement. And then so it was very humbling for us to know that our resources are actually used in Supreme Court in Nepal for actually one of the cases. So again, like I said, right, so it's the research that we do is for the purpose of guiding policy, to help building policies. And it's also a very humbling experience when your research and your findings actually used in policy making.
Okay, that was a very hectic experience. So now moving forward, research does not end with data collection. It moves toward publication and academic contribution. I'm sure that many students here are curious about what happens behind the scenes in academic publishing. So now I'd like to move toward your experience with publications. From your
Okay.
experience, what does the peer review process look like behind a successful publication? What should young researchers realistically expect from revise and resubmit cycles?
Okay. Thank you for the question again. Again, it's a very good question. So once you write a paper and then it goes through, a couple of reviewing. So you do your own review, and then you also ask your PhD advisors to review a paper. And once they, give you their suggestions, and then once they're okay with the review, then the next part is okay, publication. Because when you write a paper, as long as it's not published, the findings really just to you, right? So you are the one who did the study, and then you understand the finding, and then you probably go to conferences here and there, and then you publish your I mean, you just talk about your research in the conferences. But unless you actually do the publication, right, so this is not available to the open mass, right? So for example, when I wrote this paper on Nepal using data from Nepal, and I was presenting my findings in the United States. I was going to conferences and presenting my work. But then the audience in Nepal didn't know about my research, didn't know about my finding. So the way to select to really so bring my results into light is actually by publishing. So publishing is interesting because it could be frustrating. First is identifying what journal you're looking at, right, and then what journal to send your paper. So that is the first challenge that you encounter. Okay, what journal that you send your publication to. So my experience, like so how we how I do things is, so I look at what journals I'm repeatedly citing in my paper, right? So what couple of journals that I keep, so like the papers published in certain journals that I keep citing in my own paper. So I look at them and I see that, okay, my paper could be a good fit to that journal because they're already publishing papers, right, similar to my topic. So they'll be interested in my topic. So so I list out a couple of those journals. Maybe let's say I select four of them, and I'll see what is the highest ranked journal, right? So chances are that your paper may be rejected there, right? But often they either let's say even if it's rejected, they either sometimes the journal just rejected saying like, hey, we just rejecting the paper because we don't see the fit, or they could be rejecting the paper, but at least give you some feedback saying, well, the paper is not to our standard, but then here are a couple of things that you can to do for your future publication, right? So you usually start with the higher journal, right? Again, the chances are that it will be rejected, but then at least you could the expect. I mean, usually, I mean, or occasionally you'd get rejection with comments, and then those are always helpful. And then you sort of like put those comments in your work again, and then you try it for the second journal, and then let's say the second journal likes your work, right? So that would pass the desk, so that would pass the editorial board. The editorial board would decide that, well, this paper looks good, right? This fits to our journal's objective, so this looks like a good fit. So they'd send invitations to reviewers. So reviewers who publish papers like on that topic or similar topics will be they'll receive an email saying like, hey, would you like to review this paper? We got this paper, would you like to review it? And I, for example, I also get all this email saying like, hey, would you like to review this paper? Like, this is similar to the research that you do, this is within your research interest, so would you like to review this paper? So once those reviewers get those requests, and then they accept it, reject it. So let's say they accepted. Let's say there were two reviewers who accepted your the request, and so they'll review your work, and then they'll assess your work, and then they'd either give you minor comments saying like the paper is good. There's just a couple of things I want them to address, or there could be major comments where they say that the paper what it is like right now has to do a lot of work. There's a lot of missing, arguments that miss, evidence, or there's more evidence needed, or the writing may not be good. So they give you, saying like major revisions that needed. So a paper could qualify as a minor revision or a major revision. And then so reviewers will give those papers back to the editors, and the editor would now decide whether they would like to continue with the paper. And then you'd get an email saying like, well, we've identified that the reviewers have already reviewed the paper, and looks like you have a major revision to do, or they'd be saying there's a minor revision to do, and then you'll get all those comments from the reviewers, and then you sit down and then try to address all those comments. So most of the comments are doable, right? So you can do them. They just ask you like, hey, could you give me more explanation about your data, or could you give me some additional explanation about your methodology, or if you could just like cite this recent paper. So most of the comments are doable. Sometimes the comments that they give may not be doable because you are really confined by your data. So the data has so much information. They don't have, so it's really difficult to come with the perfect data. So perfect data does not exist. So it's difficult to address everything the reviewers tell you to do. So you humbly tell them that, well, this is something, thank you so much for your comment. This is something we also thought about, but then we are really confined by our data here. Or this is and then we actually address that in our limitation of the paper. Right. So in the paper, you also talk about what are the limitations of your paper, and you can tell the reviewer saying that, well, we've already put that as a limitation of our paper, or thank you so much for saying that there's a gap here, so we'll put that as a limitation in our paper. So usually, so you address all those comments, or at least try to give some explanation of why we're not able to address some comments, and then you sort of like give those reviews back to the revision back to the editor, and the editor will look at it, and then they'll again pass those down to the reviewers who reviewed the paper. And if the reviewers are happy with your revision, then they usually recommend for acceptance of your paper, or they could be following up with you with more comments. Okay, so those things happen. So in my experience, I've had experience where my paper was accepted after the first revision. And there was also one instance where I had to review my paper 4 times before actually publication because the reviewers keep asking for more questions.
You have shared valuable insights about research and publications. Since academia involves both research and teaching, now I would like to shift the discussion slightly toward your teaching experience and mentorship. You have also contributed to teaching focused work on water economics and experimental learning. How do you see the relationship between research and teaching in economics?
So research and teaching go hand in hand, like because the textbook that we have, all the economic theories have been we have at this point, right? They were all published in some paper or books at some point, right? So let's say the economic theory on household production function was published in 1950s, right, by Gary Baker. It was part of a publication, and later on, once this is generally accepted, becomes part of your textbook. So all the textbook knowledge that you have is based on some study done in a published article at some point. But they do go in hand. Like I, for example, really like talking about research while I'm teaching class, right? And the students have also given me feedback saying like they really liked it, right? So instead of just covering theories, if I tell them that, well, if so rather than just covering theory, if I tell them that, well, I actually went to Nepal and did this study based on this theory, and these are my findings, right? So sometimes I actually ask students to take the survey, the survey that I developed. Sometimes I ask them to take a portion of the survey themselves, right? Just to tell them more about, just to try to connect to what I'm teaching in class. So they go in hand in hand.
Okay, you have taught many subjects. Could you please briefly describe how teaching shaped your perspective as a researcher?
Well, like I said, it does shape my perspective a lot, right? Because when you're teaching, so being a student and being a teacher is very interesting because when you're a student, right, there could be a lot of topics that you may not be comfortable with, or sometimes you also ignore them, saying like if it comes in the exam, I'll just I'll decide not to write about that question, or I'll choose another question. So as a student, there's this degree of freedom where you can actually say that there's a certain topic I'm not really familiar with it. So you don't become very inquisitive about things that you're not comfortable with. As professors, right, you can't decide to ignore certain topics, because I, for example, teaching this really big classroom of 250 students, right? So somewhere between 100 to 250 students. So they often ask you questions. So, and then you have to be on your toes to answer those questions. So while I'm preparing for lecture, I have to like delve into each topic very thoroughly, right? So that if I encounter questions on those topics, I am able to answer those questions. So your preparation is different, right? So, and once you start delving deeper into these topics, then you start understanding these things more deeply, more. So like you understand more about those topics, and they could also help influence your own research, right? Because so I am not a labor economist, and I had a chance to teach labor economics once, and while I'm preparing for the lecture, I'm also learning so much about labor economics in that process. And that really helped me in one of my papers where I was actually looking at willingness to. So in Nepal, in the context of Nepal, a lot of people decide to volunteer for, let's say, river cleanup program or some environmental cleaning up the public parks. So all these things are there in Nepal. And then while I'm trying to understand what kind of people would volunteer, right? Because while you're volunteering, right, there's also this opportunity cost. We can actually go to the job market and actually start earning money versus volunteering, right? So there's this trade-off there. So while I was actually preparing as an instructor to teach labor economics, so insights from those courses were really helpful while I was tackling that research paper.
As we know, there are many students and aspiring economists joining us in this session today. I'm sure they are very interested in learning from your experiences and understanding how they can prepare themselves for similar paths. So now I'd like to move toward advice for our students. For students writing an honor thesis or independent study, what makes a topic and research plan genuinely visible and strong?
Okay, so a good research question is good research paper is where you are not vague, right? You have a precise research question, and then you're able to analyze the research question like really well. So I have mentored several honors thesis paper as well as independent study, and they typically tend to be 1 semester, 2 semester long. So often undergrad students like I said again, I've been repeating myself here, which is that we have not been trained to do research, for a very long time. We've been trained to sit in the class, to will in the exam, right? So this research part comes in very late in our life. Okay, so we are not like really well trained to do research. So often undergrad students, when they come to me and then they pitch me an idea, like often some ideas are really good, but sometimes the ideas are very ambitious. Like so even though the project is supposed to last for 1 semester or 2 semester, so this could easily be a PhD topic, that could be done for 3 4 years, right? So sometimes they are very ambitious, or sometimes they could be very vague, right? So I need to tell them that could it be more specific, because for honor thesis, your question is very vague, right? What is the impact of education on GDP, for example? It's a very vague question. Okay, so but then could you sort of like look at, you can break it down, then look at specific cases, right? Or so I try to help them so like finalize the topic and then make them more concise, to be able to explain that within a semester to semester, right? And if your program, if your topic is very ambitious, I ask them not to be too ambitious, right? Think about your scope, think about the timeline. So if instead of for example, recently a student came to me and she wanted to understand what is the impact of, so how are the crime differences in the USA. Okay, the level of crime different in the USA, north versus the south. But then her project was very ambitious in the sense that she wanted to draw a historical, historical, so like in the context, understand the issue, and then the present issue, and within the present issue there are a lot of things that you wanted to do. So I told her that, well, your question is interesting, but it's just that given this is supposed to be a 1 year program, 1 year thing, this is very ambitious. So how about we shorten our history, and also within the analysis, how do we only stick to, let's say, property crimes, right? Rather than thinking about violent crime, property crimes, theft crime, and all kinds of crime, how do we only stick to violent crimes, and how those could be different in north versus south, right? So make it manageable. So those are the things that I usually tell students, right? So again, come up with a good research question, but make it manageable. Don't be too ambitious, right? And don't be too vague, right? So those are the things that we're looking at.
Okay, so for students studying economics in Nepal, how can they decide whether a research-oriented master's or PhD abroad is the right next step?
Yeah, so this is a big question, right? So in my case, right, it was a no-brainer for me to come to USA, because I went to Buran Secondary School, and it was generally the practice that people would apply to United States and come to United States. And then my own brother was in the United States, so it was a no-brainer for me to come to the United States. But for a lot of Nepalese students, there's this a big question whether I want to continue being in Nepal, or should I come to the United States. So again, it really depends on your career objective, right? So if you are someone who is working in Nepal while also like doing your master's thesis, and your eventual goal is to be in Nepal to contribute to the public service, Lok Seva, or to be in one of the national Nepal Rashtra Bank, for example, a Rajya Banijya Bank, or other places, right? Or keep contributing to NGO, INGO, right? If your eventual goal is that, right? So we do have a good master's program, at least in various universities in Nepal, like the TU University or the Kathmandu University, right? In the US, the good thing is that you get this really broad experience, right? You come to the US, and you are become friends with a lot of people from a lot of different places. You get introduced to professors who are doing this really amazing research, and you start understanding things from this really broader perspective, right? When you come out of the Nepal, you understand, okay, this is interesting. This is something that I don't know. This is a new environment, and then you're trying to understand economics in relation to this environment, and also from a global perspective. So all those are there, but it comes at a big cost, right? For example, in the US right now, most PhD programs are funded, but they are very competitive, right? So you have to be very good to get into PhD program with good funding. But master students, there's a cost involved, right? So for example, at Texas A&M, we currently have two Nepalese students, and those Nepalese students are paying $20,000 a year, right? So for Nepal, and for Nepal, for Nepalese students, there is almost 29 lakhs per year. So master's program is typically 2 years. So $20,000 plus each year is $40,000 in total. So that's we're looking at 55 to 60 lakhs, just to fund your education, right? So again, master's program, typically the funding is limited, right? So all those costs are involved, right? So again, if it's for you to decide whether the opportunity cost, or this trade-off of this his expense versus studying abroad is really worth it, or if you really sort of like want to do that, right? So those are questions for you to answer.
What skills matter most for research track students today? Econometrics, writing, programming, field methods, or something else? And how should they prioritize?
So again, this question depends on whether you're trying to go to a master's program or a PhD program, right? For again, when you enter the master's program, PhD program, you'll receive training on these, right? So, but it's good to prepare before entering those programs, okay? And all that you mentioned is all of those are important. It's good to have a mathematical background, right? Because in grad school we'll do a lot of calculus and derivatives, and in PhD program, my first year of PhD program, we did nothing but math. Okay, if you like, if I go back and look at my notes from my first year of PhD, we did nothing but math. Okay, so having a good math background is important. In addition to that, statistical background, right? Your writing, especially coming from South Asia, in Nepal, your writing, could be another challenge, right? So all those, whatever you mentioned, all those are important, right? So again, when you enter this program, you will receive training on those, but it's good to prepare yourself, right? At least if you're applying for a PhD program, is important that you establish in your application that you already have some experience with all these different things, right? Econometrics, your mathematical background, understanding of economics, right? And then you can apply, right? And then application that usually gets evaluated. Yeah.
Okay, so what are the most common mistakes you see in SOPs and CVs of applicants? And what simple changes make an application stand out?
So uh, so it's so your application, right? So for example, I'll talk about my own department at Texas A&M University. So every year we have 215 to 15 to 20 PhD students. I think for master students we have 60 students who start the master's program here. It's 60 master students and then 15 to 20 PhD students every year. But then we receive a lot of application, right? For PhD program, we typically receive around 200 to 300 application. For masters, we also receive a similar kind of some similar number of applications, and then it's mostly that some faculty will evaluate your application, but faculty themselves are very busy. They're already very busy with teaching. They're already very busy with their own research, right? Also some other service to the department. So it's difficult for faculty members to give a thorough time for your application, right? It's very difficult for faculty. So initially, there's a filtering out process where they look at the CV, and if the CV looks interesting, then then they look at your essay, right, to see whether you're someone who could who looks fit for the department, right? So again, like I said, the faculties have very less time for application. Okay, so I'd say a good essay has three big components. One is that you establish, you're clear about what program you're applying to and what university, right? So if you're applying to Texas A&M University, for example, in our industrial organization, you should be clear that you're applying for this program at Texas A&M, okay? And then you know why you are applying for that program, what interests you in that program, okay, what interests you about industrial organization. You sufficiently so that you one is that you have interest in industrial organization. Next is that what is your motivation, right? Why do you think that field is exciting? And lastly, that you establish that you are capable, right? You have the experience, you have the education, you have the aptitude to pursue that at Texas A&M University. Okay, three things. First is that you're clear about what program you're applying to. Second is that you sufficiently establish why you're interested in that topic, and lastly, why you are a good fit for the program, or what aptitude, what experience, what education that you have that makes you a good candidate. Okay, as long as you establish those three things, right? So it's a good SAP. Okay, so in SAP or in your resume, right, don't make them too long. Like I said, the faculties don't have enough time to go through your things in detail, right? If they find this resume exciting. Then they start looking at essay, then they start looking at recommendations, right? And then they finalize those 15, 20 students. Okay. So in a resume, don't make them too long. Don't make them 10 pages long or 6 pages long, right? Try to make it within 1 or 2 pages. Highlight your key strengths, right? Tell everything about your, all your experience, all your education, but then fit that within 1 or 2 pages. Don't make them too long. Also, I said, don't beat around the bush, right? Don't beat around the bush, right? Be very, concise, be very sort of like, succinct about what you want to say. Okay, within, 1 to 3 pages.
Okay, so based on your experience, what is one aspect of academia that students often underestimate before entering graduate school?
Okay, one is research, like I said, right? So, because we don't have the experience of doing research, one, there's something that we really underestimate, right? Research is very hard work. Like when I entered a PhD program, the first year was all mathematics. So I went to classes, did exam, right? So those are easier thing to do, like in comparison. If you look at the overall PhD journey, the easier things to do is go to classes, attend classes, jot down all the notes, take exams, pass the courses. Those are easy things to do because all those are already set for you, right? The professors set all the the coursework for you. Everything is easier. But once you saw like so in the USA, the first 2 years, you take all the classes, you all the mathematics, you do all the take classes, and the next remaining 3 to 4 years is you actually sit down and do the research. Now the research part is very difficult, right? You're coming up with things that no one has explored before. You're coming with research question that no one has tackled before, right? So you are an expert in that field. So you're trying to become an expert in that topic, right? So becoming that is very difficult. So what this is something that students often underestimate, right? What it takes to do research. Um, the other thing is that in undergrad, right, so we don't have training, a lot of the training in economics, right? So for example, a lot of the programs don't have a very strong, like training in econometrics, for example, or they don't have this very so like strong background in theory, for example, right? So when you come to grad school and now you start encountering all these things, right? So learning theory very mathematically, all calculus based. You are learning all econometrics, right? And then those become very big challenge, right? And also the expectations are very different. So for example, supervise both undergrad and graduate papers, research papers, right? So independent studies. So expectations are also very different, right? For undergrad students, if they write a paper and then if I see that this is sufficient enough to pass the course, right? My expectations are not very high from an undergrad student, but from a graduate students, I demand much more, right? I demand, that they have a broad understanding of economics, they have a broad understanding of the topic, they are analyzing their data well using econometrics. So the expectations are much bigger when it comes to graduate studies, graduate students.
As we are gradually heading toward the end of this insightful session, I would like to conclude with a reflection. What keeps you motivated to continue research and teaching, and what message would you like to give to young economists?
Right. So what keeps me motivated is like once you publish paper, right? So the whole world can read a paper, and I often get contacted, like whether I want to present at this particular conference, or I'd like to do co-authorship, right? Or I get emails from all these journals saying like, hey, would you like to review this paper, right? So all these are very gratifying. You go to conferences, you present your work, right? And people are like, so all these are very gratifying. And then also, like I said, one of my research was used in the Supreme Court of Nepal for one of the cases there. So these are all gratifying experience, and that this keeps you moving. In terms of teaching, right? So every semester I teach around 400 students. So I go to class and I'm, there's this deep satisfaction in realizing that I'm imparting my knowledge. So whatever I've learned so far, I'm sort of like, passing that down to, the next generation of students. I'm imparting my, this knowledge. The students, are sort of like learning from me, right? And then I often get emails from students saying like, they really had a good time in that class, right? So there's this one particular topic that they're very interested in, or they ask me follow-up questions. They ask me, this what research paper, can I recommend them? What books, for example, can I recommend them to study further on those topics? So once you start seeing those, so those are very gratifying. And in terms of economics, and the message for young economists in Nepal is that, so in the context of Nepal, and I'll draw a parallel between Nepal and India. So in India, if you look at the overall Indian history, right, economists have been been all the economics as a discipline was, was motivated in the society phase, right? So uh, in 1920s we had B.R. Ambedkar, one of the founding fathers of India, who studied economics at Cambridge, right? We also had Pranab Mukherjee, who was the president of India, who studied economics. You had Manmohan Singh, the prime minister of Nepal, the prime minister of India, who studied economics at Cambridge. We also had Amartya Sen, who went on to win the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1998. We had Abhijit Banerjee, who won the Nobel Prize in 2019. So in India, economics was very much encouraged, right? So economists was, were seen like very, so like they were highly regarded. They were seen very nicely. They were students were encouraged to take up economics. But in the case of Nepal, right, I don't know whether things have changed now. But when I was like growing up, the whole focus was about either becoming a doctor or an engineer, right? So if I told my parents that I have a distinction in SLC, and I wanted to study economics, right? That was a big no-no in the society, right? Everyone was asking me, why do you want to study economics? Okay, you are a good science student, you have a good, percentage in your percentage in your SLC, why do you want to take up economics? You should do something science based or computer science, right? So it took me some, convincing, in my own family, to tell everyone that I'm studying economics, right? So even economics was not much encouraged. Now things are changing. I see that in a recent time, at least in the last 5 to 10 years, things are changing, and now more and more students are taking economics. But that wasn't the case, right? So economics for a very long time was not very encouraged. Becoming a doctor, becoming an engineer, and then later a chartered accountant was more encouraged. But now things are changing, right? People are understanding the value of economics, right? And economics can also be applied to a lot of these areas, right? So when I went to ICMOD, for example, my program director was very excited because he was a scientist, an atmospheric scientist who was looking at air pollution, and he saw me, and then he was very excited that I joined the team because I am trying to understand how these problems, environmental problems, are impacting like people at a social level, right? So he was very excited that I was joining the team, right? So now there is a realization that economics can bring a lot of values, right? So we bring in a lot of values for a lot of social issues, whether it be environmental issues, whether it be issues related to legislation, whether it be to topics related to the economic growth, right? All of those various issues, economics has things to say, right? Has things to contribute to. So there's this realization now, right? So it's all great that you guys are interested in economics. Like keep working, right? Economics is an amazing field. Like personally, I started with becoming a math student. I started as a math student, and I ended up choosing economics, and I've never regretted that decision, because economics is a wonderful discipline, right? So we have so much to contribute to, right? Especially in the case of Nepal, where economics for a very long time was not taken up. So economic research in general, in a lot of topics, is very still missing in Nepal. So I'm really happy that you are all like interested in Nepal and all other South Asian countries, right? That is great.
Okay, so one last question. What career opportunities can young people expect if they study economics, and how can they build a successful career in this field?
Oh yeah, economics, like I said, is amazing, right? Because in economics, we know how to do math, we know how to analyze data, right? We have this philosophical understanding of things. We also understand history to some extent, right? So so economics, the economic training is really great training, and so we have career opportunities in almost every field, right? For example, all the research organizations like the UN, the World Bank, the IMF, Asian Development Bank, ECMOD, they're all looking to recruit economists, right? So those are research organizations, and there's also a place for us in academia, right? So economics, right? We have economics department almost every university now, right? So and it's growing, right? So we have opportunities there. We also have opportunities in industry. In the US, for example, Amazon is hiring economists. Your Facebook is hiring economists. Your Airbnb is hiring economists, right? So all the industries are also like hiring economists, right? So in the USA, economics is one of the highest like paying degrees that we have, right? So for example, in the Texas A&M, the master students, once they graduate from Texas A&M, for example, the average starting salary is $87,000. Okay, So compare that to, let's say, a degree in psychology, which would pay around $65,000. So $65,000 versus $87,000. So economists, we have, there's big demand, and they also start with this really, big salary.
It has truly been a wonderful session, sir. I'm sure our students have learned a lot from your experiences and insights. Now we'll move to the Q&A session. If you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand or share them in the chat. I encourage everyone to make the most of this opportunity and ask any questions you may have.
I see someone raised their hand.
On Supersal, you can unmute yourself.
First of all, hello, sir. My question is that for students who have studied entirely in Nepal, what gaps should we be aware of when competing globally, and how can we realistically bridge those gaps?
Yeah. So I think, in Nepal we do a really good job in with the theories, right? So the classes that we have are really good at teaching theories, right? So we cover most of the theories, but I think a gap. I think things are improving now. Is that the econometrics education I think is lacking, right? So how do we analyze data? How do we do econometrics is lacking, right? So again, the question is how can you select, fill that gap? So one is that you can self study, right? You can, but I think there are also like other organizations. Like I know when I was working at EC Mode, there's an economics so like this unit there that used to organize this econometrics training sessions, right? So look for those opportunities. We also have online courses online that offer services on how to teach econometrics, right? So I think that is one. And then also as the world is becoming more and more data oriented, right? So there's so having theories is knowing theory is amazing, but there's also there's this realization that as the world is becoming more and more data oriented, also understanding how to analyze data.
Niraj Khatiwada, you can unmute.
Hello, sir.
Hi.
First of all, I would like to thank Niraj Khatiwada, sir, as well as Ednep Abhiyan for providing this wonderful platform for this wonderful discussion. So, first of all, I am a BBA graduate, and I see most of the PhD program in the USA having prerequisites of many math courses like Calculus 1, Calculus 2, Calculus 3, linear algebra, real analysis as well. And for someone who is completely from management background like me, and should we be discouraged from applying to such PhD program, or is there any way that we can actually work on that part and build our mathematical background from scratch?
Yeah, so again, you have a couple of options, right? One is that you can start with the master's program, right? Master's program are not as demanding. The application are not, the requirement are not as high as the PhD program. So one is you can start with the master's program, right? And a lot of NIPLI students, they come to the US to looking to do the master's program, right? The other is that even in the PhD program, right, they understand that globally, right? So even though in Nepal, for example, right, you take courses, math courses, and those math courses already have calculus, have linear algebra, and all those things, right? But because since in your transcript it just appears that you have taken mathematics 1, for example, and within mathematics 1, what courses, what topics you've taken is not often understood from your resume. Then in your CV, for example, right, you can clarify that within this math topic, right, these are the math course, these are the topics that we actually covered. So yeah, those are the things that you can do.
So again, I'd like to rephrase my question. Like,
Yes, sir.
they actually ask for transcript on several this calculus courses in during undergraduate. Actually, during BBA, we haven't studied or covered those topics or those courses. So,
Mhm.
does that mean we aren't eligible for such program or what?
So, like I said, so it's good to start if those requisites have not been fulfilled, right? At least again, in the U.S. universities, the PhD application requirements are really high, right? Because often the PhD programs are very are funded, and then there's also this big global competition. You have applications from, all these countries, right? From India, from Sri Lanka, we have applications coming from European countries, from South American countries. So this is much more so like competition when it comes to the PhD program, right? So, and often if you don't have the requisites, then so it can be difficult for you to be accepted in those programs, right? But so a good a good thing to do would be to come start as a master. If your eventual goal is to come to the US, right, then start as a master student. Where to now start fulfilling. So when you go to the master's program, right, then you start taking all these courses. So you can fulfill those requirements as a master students. Or the other thing is that in the Nepal, right, so you can actually take those courses, take some time, take those courses, and fulfill those requirements before applying. Okay, so it really depends on what route you want to take.
Thank you, sir.
So I see some questions in the the chats. So Nishal Tiwari, so I'll read a couple of questions from there. So Nishal Tiwari asked how to properly read or analyze research papers that's already been published, and how taking references from them goes, and then how much should we take references from others' papers in our own paper? Okay, so good question, Nishal. So I'll answer this. So reading research paper is really helpful, right? So during my PhD, I'm sure I read more than 300 to 400 papers, because in my own dissertation I cited around 140 papers, right? So oftentimes, like, I've understood a lot from the paper, right? So I've understood what are the research gaps in the where I can contribute, and also what kind of data they've used, what kind of methodology that they've approached. Sometimes, while you're trying to analyze data, sometimes you don't understand exactly, even further that happens, we don't exactly know what kind of econometric technique to use, right? What, because we have certain endogenous issue, for example, and then what kind of data analysis tool to use. And then if I go back to those papers, and then if there are similar problems that they encountered, and then they've used a particular technique, then we can borrow from these techniques and we can use them. So read a lot of papers, you gain a lot of insights from those papers, right? Reading is amazing. It doesn't hurt to read papers, right? So read a lot of papers, have a broader understanding, look at what type of data they use, what is the data source, what methodology that they use, what discussions they have in the paper, what are the research gaps that they identified at the end of the paper, what are the policy solutions that they propose. So all these are amazing things. So keep reading papers. So reading really helps. Okay, I have another question from Deepak Parajuli. He asks, I personally feel that it is up to now sharing just an experience on how to become an economist rather than sharing areas on the building of career becoming an economist. To become an economist rather than sharing areas on building a career becoming economist. Like I said, right? So economist has a lot of demand recently, even in Nepal, right? So in Nepal right now, right? So when I was working in EC mode, right? They were very happy because in their team, right? So no economist had never worked in their team, right? So there was a realization there's an economist who has a background in econometrics, in mathematics, who can also add value to the social understanding, the social impact of all these environmental problems. So I was very much welcomed. So the economist has role in research organization, right? Has role in academia, has role in industry, right? So there's a much broader demand for economists now. There's a realization that economists brings a lot of values, right? So if you look at our new channel, 10, 15 years from now, there's hardly any economist would come and then give talks, for example. But now if you tune in and then you have people interviewing Dr. Swarning Wagle, Dr. Bishop Bordel, Dr. Sarma and other people, right? So there's realization that there's a lot of value that economists can bring, and therefore there's a lot of career opportunities that economists have. The other question from Usan: as an economic student currently here in Nepal, what should be my current strategy as well as actions for making myself more competitive, increase the chance of getting offer from PhD program, and other opportunity in good foreign institution, right? So in PhD, we are looking for in a essay, like I said, right? So we are looking for three things: whether you are clear about what you want to study within economics, right? In my Texas A&M, right? So we offer a PhD program in econometrics, macroeconomics, and public economics. And let's say you decide to apply to Texas A&M in public in economics. First is that we want to know whether they are clear about that you want to do public economics in Texas A&M University. Next is that why you're interested in public economics. What exactly excites you about public economics, and why Texas A&M particularly? And then lastly, whether you have the right sort of like background to do a PhD in public economics at Texas A&M, right? Which means that the background could be, well, I've already taken all the prerequisites. I've already started some research. I already have research experience, right? I already have a published paper, or I'm actually working on a paper, or so I already have a good GRE score in mathematics, or I already have some experience with teaching, for example, right? So all these things, highlighting all these things make you a very good applicants. Okay. Next is, can I ask a question from, this is from Suzana Rai. Can I ask one question? I would like to know which website you usually use after completing your research for a flagship, a good one. So I personally used Turnitin. So it's a program available to us, and then once we put our research paper there, turn it in. So it gives you, how much of my writing is matching with the earlier published paper. So if I see that the numbers are pretty high, let's say 20% or more, then I go back and try to sort of like change things in my writing. All right. So are there more questions from the audience?
Sir Prajwal has asked a question.
Last question. As a final year math undergrad student with no prior formal education, economics interested in transitioning to economics modeling, should I start with econometrics or understanding theory of economics, like taking foundational to intermediate macroeconomic courses? Very good question, Prajwal. And then I was in the exact same boat, right? So even I have my undergrad training was in mathematics, right? So I was not an econ major in my undergrad because my college didn't offer a major in economics. So I ended up with a undergraduate degree in mathematics, business, and philosophy, right? But then that was very helpful for me in my essay, right? I was able to highlight that economics is, the theory, for example, is very mathematical, very sort of like mathematical based, and I already have the right background for that. I have a undergrad in mathematics. I was among the top in my class, right? So I was able to establish that, well, I already have this formal mathematical training to help me succeed with economics. But then I would say that you go beyond that, right? Also read a lot about economic theories, right? So when I came to my PhD, right, I had a strong background in mathematics, but then I didn't have this formal training in economics. So there was this big gap for me to fill, right? So it took me a really long time to, so it took me almost a year and a half to fill that gap. So I would suggest that you already start with that process, right? Even before applying for the economics program, read, the textbook, be familiarize yourself with econometric models, take intermediate micro courses, intermediate macro courses, or principal level courses. Take some courses, and then that will help you sort of like familiarize yourself with the econometric models. And are there any other further questions?
Yes, Miss Prativa has asked.
Could you read that for me, please?
What should be the roadmap if someone wants to dedicatedly work for natural resource conservation and sustainable development and involved in major international organizations working for same purpose? I am an MBA graduate.
So what should be the roadmap if someone wants to dedicatedly work for? Okay. Okay, so MBA for MBA students, right? There's also a role for you, right? If you want to work, let's say, in an international organization, and if you want to dedicate to international conservation and sustainability issue, right? So a lot of times we do accounting, right? So as part of an economist, right, we do a lot of this cost estimation, right? Let's say we need to clean up Bagmati River, and the Bagmati River, there's a benefit, right, to cleaning up the river, but there's also the big cost, right? So often my role as an economist is estimating the cost of the cleanup, and then also estimating what will be the benefit of that cleanup, right? So particularly MBAs can help, with particularly interested as helping with the management, right, of that of those projects. If government, for example, if this INGO, for example, were to partner with the government and were actually to implement these projects, at least start the initial project, then MBAs can certainly help with a couple of things. One is with the managerial things, right, and also with the accounting, right. So there's also areas for MBAs to contribute.
We are going to end our Q&A session over here. Thank you for the insightful questions and for actively participating in today's session. I hope everyone has learned something valuable from this discussion, and we look forward to organizing more such meaningful and engaging events in the future. We would love to hear your feedback. You can share it with us in the chat or speak to us directly. As we come to the end of this discussion, I would like to sincerely thank Dr. Niraj Khatiwada for sharing his time, experiences, and valuable insights with us. The discussion has been extremely informative and meaningful to us and our audience. I would also like to inform everyone that the entire session has been recorded. You can access the recording through our official YouTube channel. We encourage you to stay connected with us through our social media platforms for updates and upcoming sessions and events. Thank you
Thank you
very
so much
much.
for inviting. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for joining us today. Have a wonderful evening and good night, everyone.